Well, welcome to today's lunch panel where we're going to discuss the question, what can the United States do to provide solutions to water security problems? And we're very fortunate to have a distinguished panel to stimulate this important discussion. And before I introduce briefly the panel, here's kind of the rules. We'll do it a little bit different than the last panel, although that panel was great. After I introduce all of the panel members, then each panel member will get a chance to spend about 5 minutes or so to introduce you to them. I tell you about their background briefly, and then to hopefully make whatever comments or statements they want to make regarding this important question, because this is intended to be a discussion between you and us, not just for you to sit and listen to us talk. And so with that, I'll start from my left, your right. Our panel consists of Dr. Julia Bucknall, Senior Manager of the Water Anchor of the World Bank. Next to her is Chris Holmes, Global Water Coordinator for U.S. Agency for International Development. Immediately to my left is Jeff Seabright, Vice President of Environment and Water Resources, the Coca-Cola Company. And our closing speaker today. To my right is Major General Chris Lyons, Deputy Director for Political Military Affairs for Africa on the Joint Staff J5. And then next to him is Dr. June Bando, Special Advisor to the Commander to General Rodriguez, U.S. Africa Command. And she has been here for a few days, so the jet lag is apparently no longer with her, we hope. And to my far right, to your left, is Prince Selassie, President of the Crown Council of Ethiopia, who I had the privilege of meeting with a number of months ago, and so we're grateful for him to be able to be with us today. And so let's go ahead and get started with our panel, starting to my far left. If you would start, I'd like to ask each panelist to try to keep it to approximately 5 minutes or so we can have more time for questions and discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. It's lovely to be here. I have to be really careful what I say, otherwise these guys just inch a couple of inches left and I'm off onto the floor. So I shall make sure I say very tempered things. I'm also really grateful for the doctorate that you've awarded me, because I'm afraid I am not a doctor, but you know, there's always hope. And I was the manager of the World Bank's sort of central water unit, which tries to coordinate our water practice, which goes from water resources, water supply, sanitation, water resources, water supply and sanitation, agricultural water management, and hydropower. And in August, I actually moved sort of more permanently into the hydropower business for what I call a sabbatical from water. So I'm now actually managing energy in South Asia. The conversations that I've had in the last month about energy in South Asia, many of them you could cut and paste the word water and energy. The only difference is the scale, of course, is much bigger in terms of money. So I am doing a lot of the hydropower agenda that the bank is involved in South Asia, and I'm very happy to be here. So to address the question of what can the US do, I've got 3 things I want to say, and they're not specific to the US, but because the US does have a leadership role in academia and policy dialogue and what have you, I think that's where I would like to come out. The first thing is on planning tools, and I know that's like unbelievably dull, but I believe that the engineering practices, the economics practices that we use for evaluating investments and for evaluating building, construction, are not suitable for the future. I think that they were designed in a world of 4 billion, 3 billion people over the last 100 years, carefully. And they were designed in a world where there was enough water per capita for most people and will not serve the future. I mean, just to give one example, the energy expansion planning tools that countries use to decide which power stations to build where and of what type don't take water availability into account. So my point is that we are locking into certain patterns of water consumption unnecessarily. If you put water into those models, you might choose different types of plants or different sequences of plants or different locations of plants. And that's just one example. The reason it matters is because so much of the world is being built from scratch. They don't have to rehabilitate. Anybody who's remodeled their house knows it costs much more to remodel something than it does to build it from scratch. We are building from scratch many of the things in similar ways from how we built them from scratch 100 years ago, and that's not going to work. And it's not the best way to go forward. And the same with the economics. When you're building infrastructure that lasts for 100 years and you're using discount rates that basically run out after 10 years, all the benefits that come down in the future don't count. That's kind of a pity. So I think we have to think much more carefully about how we decide how to design and evaluate investments. So that's my first point. My second point is about trade. If you could imagine a perfect world with no borders and where everybody loved each other, you wouldn't have a water problem. As we all know, there's enough water to go around. And it's almost all used in agriculture. We all know all of those things. The sense of needing food security is driving a lot of the, I mean, there's other things like employment creation, but a lot of it is about food security, domestic food self-sufficiency, which is different from food security. If countries trusted trade, they wouldn't feel so constrained by the need for domestic self-sufficiency. They would feel secure because they trusted trade. And the US has a very big role to play in that, in many ways, and I won't go into all of them, but I'm sure you all know. And my last point is about management. Again, really, sorry, really mundane. I mean, I wish I had an answer as highfalutin as these ceilings, but you know, we lose more storage, water storage per capita now with sedimentation than we are constructing. So we're actually declining the per capita water storage available because the dams that we've built are filling up faster than they were designed to do because we're not managing the landscape. In the World Bank, with just one silly example, we were looking at the designs for a dam, and a sediment guy happened to be on the team. A sediment guy, a soil guy, and he found clever sediment management techniques. He managed to reduce the capital costs of the dam by $50 million, and he managed to cut by 1/3 the area that had to be inundated. So they got the same amount of water storage for almost no cost by thinking in a slightly more lateral way across time and space. So that's what I mean by management. And you know, we all know demand management and energy efficiency equivalent things, but for water management. And so I think that there's an awful lot we can do in that way. Having the discipline to make ourselves work in that way could help a lot. I'll stop there so that we have time for discussion. And I'm really excited to be here, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I should note at the outset that I didn't realize my mic was on when I perked up and said to General Sullivan over there, "Hi, General." And at that point, half the audience perked up, so I'm pretty impressed by the level of representation from DOD here today. So the points I'd like to make today deal with the need for really setting your objectives in the water space and a strategy, the need for some fundamental research and tools and transparency in the way in which you share the tools. And I'm going to do that in 4 minutes and 26 seconds. So we found today that to be effective in the water space and to address water challenges, no matter what kind of challenge, you at least had to have a fundamental underlying strategy. And that is very difficult to do in a topic as vast and as all-encompassing as water. But with considerable consultation with our various stakeholders, many of whom are here in the room, we launched our first water strategy this year, and I hope you all would have a time to take a look at it at some point. It's on the AID website. And fundamentally, what we did is that we looked across the entire spectrum of different kinds of objectives related to water and decided we would hone in on two, which are also the two objectives that President Obama has highlighted for AID to pursue. And one is food and one is health, and the intersection is between the two. And we set as an objective, or an overarching goal, the saving of lives, and within that context, strengthening food security through our water programs and strengthening health through our water programs. And as we drill down deeper, we of course recognized the extraordinarily important interrelationship which is the subject of this conference, between water work and conflict management and mitigation and even response to conflict. But the underlying way in which we're getting at so many of these activities is to at least initially look at the linkages between water, food, water health, and the intra-linkages between the two as a way in which to have a program we can launch, and then look for linkages in the overall conflict mitigation area as it relates to water. I should note that we also took a look at research, and we've taken a look at research in the space of water and conflict. And you know, for something as important as this topic, there isn't a lot out there compared to many other disciplines. So we've launched some research, which we're doing through the universities, dealing with, for example, the impact of climate change on conflict. And we've also supported research dealing with what I think is kind of one of the key areas as it relates to water and conflict, which is the impact of conflict and water shortages on women, and how to empower and engage women in programs and various activities related to meeting critical water needs. And so we have a program underway with the Woodrow Wilson Institute right now conducting some research on that area. And we recognize that there are tools. You know, this field of water and conflict, my feeling is 50 years from now, people will look back and they'll see this as being a very seminal point where a large body of knowledge was being put together and this at a critical time. And this conference might be even recognized as one of those points. So in terms of tools, what we're looking at are, on the one hand, just integrating, kind of thinking about water sensitivity, how it might relate to conflict in one's water programs, which is pretty critical. On the other hand, we're developing some pretty sophisticated tools. There's a tool called LUCIS, L-U-C-I-S, which is the Land Use Conflict Identification Strategy. And what we're doing with that tool is we're applying GIS and spatial data to work with governments and communities to identify areas that are potentially productive, and those areas that one could anticipate that there'd be a shift of population towards those productive areas over time, and that enables people to have a sense of advanced warning and knowledge as how to adjust their planning and think in terms of conflict mitigation. So it's taking very sophisticated tools, scaling them down to very real-world, on-the-ground techniques. We also think it's very important to share the tools that we're dealing with, and one of the areas we've been working on, I think, intensely is the field of climate change and conflict over time. And I know Sherry Goodman's here today, and you know, Sherry launched one of the most important studies I've seen in a long time, and it's probably 5 years ago, and as I recall, General Sullivan chaired that group, you know, dealing with the interrelationship between climate change and potential and actual conflict. So we have a tool called the Famine Early Warning Systems Network. It's called FuseNet. If you're not aware of it, I would really urge you to be aware of it. We have been extraordinarily transparent in terms of making the world know about the tool. And we essentially take remote and on-the-ground data, and we utilize it in a way in which to do projections on shifts in climate, you know, over a 10 to 20 year period, and maybe even shorter. And we use it for other things, including analyses of trade patterns and flows of agricultural commodities in and out of an area, so as to detect what's happening with production shifts and how that might affect the drought and how do you adjust that. And we've been able to apply that tool, I think, to the benefit of a number of developing countries. And finally, there's the issue of results. You know, so we have this big subject of water and conflict, but what is the quantifiable result at the end of the day? To which I don't have an answer, because that would have to be evidence-based ultimately. And we know empirically that the result, of course, would be the saving of lives and the betterment of human beings and the protection of the environment in that process. But coming up with very specific measures, that's a real challenge ahead, and one that I think people in this room are prepared to meet. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Chris. And again, thanks to U.S. Institute for Peace and the Association of U.S. Army and U.S. Water Partnership. It's a real privilege for Coca-Cola and for me personally to been invited to join you here today. It's a special moment for me because I spent the first 20 years of my career in government. And in 1985, I began working for Senator Jay Rockefeller from my home state of West Virginia. And as some of you in the audience may know, it was Senator Jennings Randolph, a great New Deal Democrat, whose inspiration this institute was. He had pushed this for many years in the U.S. Senate, and when he retired, it fell to Senator Rockefeller and me in particular to help write the enabling legislation to create the U.S. Institute of Peace. And I didn't have any idea that 28 years later I'd be here and see such great work. So it's really very personally gratifying for me to be here this afternoon. So as the private sector business guy on the panel, I guess it falls to me to share a little bit about how we see the issue of water and water resource management, how critical it is to our business, and how we've engaged in partnerships, including with USAID, very importantly. Clearly, governments, have a vital, irreplaceable role to play in the area of water. It's the ultimate common good. But the business community has, I think, a vital role to play as well. And only through this sort of public-private collaboration, I think, can we really realize the benefits and the gains that we know we need to make in this sector. At my company, at Coca-Cola, we certainly know the value of water. It's the ingredient, essential ingredient in everything that we make. We operate in nearly 1,000 bottling plants in over 200 countries, and so we see water stress in a very real way around the world every day. And it's an irreplaceable resource for us and a vital shared resource in the communities that we operate in. We are a global business, but an intensely local business, and we know through our work that we can't thrive in failing communities, and water is a vital input to healthy, thriving communities. And so as we've gone through our work, and we have had the privilege of doing a lot of work with the Global Environment and Technology Foundation around water risk, looking at water risks in our system over the last 7 or 8 years, and really came to realize that we needed to get outside the four walls of our plants and look at watersheds, sort of nature's water factories that support our business, and the shared users of those watersheds, communities and nature, that are very much a part of that. And if we don't help address those challenges upstream, then we're not going to have ultimately a sustainable business. And as a result of that work, we put in place several major partnerships, many of which focus on Africa. We've been in Africa since 1928. We're the largest private employer in the continent of Africa and operate in every country on the continent. And clearly, some big challenges. It was clear, I think, that the Millennium Development Goals on water and sanitation would not be met in Africa back in 2008 and 2009. And that's when we launched our Replenish Africa initiative, which is a commitment over 5 years to bring in partnership safe water access to over 2 million Africans by 2015. And we and our bottling partners in Africa committed some $30 million to that effort, and we're well above target on that project and process, and we're looking to do even more. Most importantly, sitting to my left is Chris Holmes. We have a tremendous partnership with USAID, where I also worked for 8 years, called the Water and Development Alliance, which is working in 16 African countries on improving the sustainability of watersheds as sort of natural infrastructure, and also on safe water access. And we're looking to further deepen and expand that. And we announced just last week in Stockholm some additional elements of our partnership together. But this is arguably one of the largest public-private partnerships with USAID, and one that we're extremely proud of. So we take this business of partnership very seriously. We know that we can't do it alone. We're big, we're everywhere. We can leverage our local presence, we can be a catalyst, we can engage with community-based organizations, but we can't solve these challenges alone as a company, but we're deeply committed to partnership. In conclusion, I'd just say we heard a bit about the food, energy, water nexus, and Julie tells me now that she's moved over to energy, so covering two parts of that triangle. This is a really important, I think, and complex challenge, as we look at addressing water. It's not water per se, it's water as it is manifest in terms of productive uses for agriculture, or as it is impacted by or supporting energy. And what we're seeing is a growing stress factor from the burgeoning middle class. I would not suggest it's just demographics, it's actually the stress of growing consumers, as well as climate change, that is putting a real stress on that food, energy, water nexus, or triangle, if you will. And managing through that is going to be a critical challenge as we work to further build resilience around water in the future. So with that, I think I'll pause and leave time for questions.
Thank you, Jeff.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Lyons, and I'm here in my role from the Joint Staff in the Pentagon. I sit on the J5, which is the Joint Staff Strategy, Plans, and Policy Directorate, working for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And in my role, I'm responsible for the region of Africa, which incorporates 53 countries out of the 54 on the continent. And as we talk about Africa, one of the points in there that I think most of you get who've ever been there is the scale of it. And there are a couple of points that in this morning's conversation that struck me that I think we all need to remember as we talk about transboundary water issues. 54 countries, including Egypt, very few of the mechanisms in place for cross-border sorts of agreements. The regional economic communities are beginning to come along. The African Union is beginning to mature, but a lot of those structures that allow the ability to come to agreements on many of these issues aren't in place yet, and may not be for many years to come. It's also 3 times the size of the United States continental, so it's huge, diverse. There are no generalizations about Africa. There are haves, there are have-nots, there are varieties of other issues as we talked about this morning, and it's an incredibly complicated place to begin to try to come up with solutions to those problems, and that's certainly something that in my years I've begun to begin to understand, but with much more to go on that. I also talk about Africa a little bit from my 1 year in East Africa, dealing with issues in a operational area where DoD was acting, that incorporated about 13 East African countries, and getting some sense of the politics of water, both at the local level as well as the much larger sort of the strategic levels between nations in the East African continent, and how easy it is not only to get out of sync in local politics, but also within our own government and our interagency processes. And that's sort of what I wanted to touch on. Because in my role, one of the key jobs that I do is represent the uniformed services as our government develops its policies for how we will operate in Africa in different ways, whether it's in the security sector or in helping to build capacity and work with African partners. Like all combatant commands, first of all, Africa Command, and in general we'll talk about this more in a minute, our activities on the continent are guided by a number of documents that articulate our U.S. national interests, the goals, the strategies, and the resources that are available to accomplish our interests. Most of those only deal in a few sentences or at most a paragraph on Africa. Most of the rest of these globally focusing documents are focused, as you can imagine, on the Middle East, on the Pacific, and on other regions of the world. However, one document that is sort of important to the Africanists in DoD is Presidential Policy Directive 16, which came out last summer. It's the strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa, and it broadly outlines our government-wide approach to the continent, calls for strengthening democratic institutions, spurring economic growth, advancing peace and security, and promoting opportunity and development in the region. And all of those objectives are mutually supportive and reinforcing. That was something that I think all of us grasped readily, especially from this morning's discussions. And they set the clear priorities by which the executive branch agencies can effectively and efficiently align our time, efforts, and resources. Now, in that, you heard the one of the 4 goals on peace and security. Other than that, as you look across the African continent, one of the clear conclusions as we look at U.S. security interests is that there aren't very many security issues that directly affect the United States homeland. At best, we have some second or third order consequences for U.S. security interests. And those, as you can imagine, some of those are happening in the northwest regions of Africa with some of the Al-Qaeda affiliated organizations. And we pay an awful lot of attention to those from the security perspective. So the question then is, why is DoD getting involved in building capacity in other sectors on the continent, whether it's water, health, or other lanes? We would arguably be an odd fit in most of those. And really, it's that nexus of security and the growing understanding of the link between development, economic growth, opportunity for people on the continent, and undermining those conditions that lead people toward violent extremist organizations. So where DoD can fit in to try to prevent those types of conditions, that's where we'll look to try to use the capacity, that large capacity that was mentioned this morning. We'll try to apply that. Where we are challenged is that our legal authorities, and a number of you are Washington, D.C. denizens as well, so you understand this, the authorities that Congress has given us aren't necessarily the best fit for allowing our uniformed services to come in and do those types of activities that are outside of our normal realm of security and defense of the homeland. So sending in medical teams, engineer teams, other types of activities like that are outside the norm require us to come up with some odd or creative mechanisms, and that gets to General Talley's initiative that he showed in the video this morning, creative ways of trying to get at some of these challenges and problems that work both in the benefit of DoD, but also in the achievement of some of these objectives of getting at the second and third order consequences or second and third order challenges for us. And I think I'm beginning to run out of time, but happy to address any questions, I think, on how we're trying to get at some of the authorities, get at the resources, which are also very short, and the political will that was also discussed this morning that's going to be needed in order to tackle these very difficult problems as we go forward.
Sir, thank you. Let me begin by also thanking USIP, AUSA, and the U.S. Water Partnership for facilitating this important discussion. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to provide some perspectives from the combatant command. In terms of my personal background, I work at AFRICOM as a strategic and a strategic communications advisor to the commander. I'm the chief of a small group called the Commander's Action Group. We're basically the general's internal think tank and handle some strategic communications functions. But previous to going to AFRICOM, I worked on peace and security issues and science and technology issues focused on Africa for the State Department, and in a previous life was an ecologist. That's actually my academic training. So the issues that we're talking about today actually are sort of a nice confluence of both past and present professional focuses for me, so it's a real personal pleasure to be here. Going back to AFRICOM's perspectives, though, on water and conflict, General Lyons and General Engel did a really nice job of outlining both the policy and the intelligence context of our efforts as the COCOM. So I think it's quite clear that we have, as the combatant command, a fairly limited role. But we do have a very strong interest in understanding water issues, primarily as an aspect of the strategic environment, because we recognize that water is an important variable that impacts the likelihood of conflict, instability, and state failure. It's increasingly clear, I think everyone in the room recognizes, that water is not only a human health, economic development, or environmental issue, it is a security issue with implications at the national, regional, and global levels. So again, we very much appreciate the dialogue that's happening here today. I thought I'd share just a few broad perspectives on approaches to addressing water and conflict issues. The good news, at least looking through the decadal lens as highlighted earlier by General Engel, is that as assessed by the U.S. intelligence community, the prospect of a water-related state-on-state conflict occurring in the next decade appears to be limited. And it also appears that effective management structures and cross-border water arrangements can help to address some of the challenges underlying these tensions. Dr. Salzberg pointed out that historically water tensions have led to more water sharing agreements than they have to violent conflicts. We hope that trend continues. And a very important point that I think has particular implications for Africa is that joint water governance has often created opportunities for cooperation on broader issues. So we welcome developments in those areas as well, with water serving as a potential entry point for regional cooperation, sustainable regional cooperation among nations. An important point for us at AFRICOM is that strengthening institutions is key to sustainable progress. And that's both true in the sense of enhancing access to water and sanitation, but also from, again, the perspective of the COCOM, in terms of supporting the development of professional and capable militaries that can serve as forces for good in their societies. And so we really see these efforts as being very broadly parallel and mutually reinforcing. I did want to spend just a little bit of time talking specifically about AFRICOM's role in these efforts. Again, they are narrow, but we pursue both near and long-term objectives in Africa in support of Presidential Policy Directive 16, as well as Presidential Policy Directive 13, so the U.S. policies for both Sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa. And we do this by focusing on the execution of 6 key tasks. So the first one won't surprise you. It's focused on countering violent extremism and the networks that support them, or violent extremist organizations and the networks that support them. We also focus on supporting defense institution building, strengthening maritime security, supporting peace support operations, supporting humanitarian and disaster response, and countering the illicit flows of drugs, weapons, money, and people. In terms of activities that actually touch on water, we have a very small environmental security program that primarily focuses on strengthening partner capabilities to address food and water security and to respond to humanitarian crises and disasters in the region. So this program has primarily focused on helping to stimulate dialogue by organizing workshops, seminars, and conferences to help bring together subject matter experts. We've also got some small civil affairs projects that support the development of small-scale water and sanitation infrastructure in the region. And then, in a more general sense, our multinational exercises and training activities help to strengthen operational capabilities, interoperability, and cooperation between countries that can help to improve their ability to respond to natural disasters and other crises, which are often water-related. We're very supportive of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers activities in Africa, particularly those that help to build capacity for infrastructure development. In the right context, these activities can help to increase infrastructure, strengthen civil-military relations, and even develop vocational skills that can help to provide a source of income as individuals exit the military. Thank you. So I'll just close by saying that these kinds of activities have potential roles in disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration strategies, as well as security sector reform strategies as our partners seek to right-size their militaries. So let me end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the organizers today for having invited me to speak here today. And I'm going to focus today on water quality in Africa and the links to stability, prosperity, and the conflict avoidance. I have only a few minutes to make my remarks and do not wish to waste time merely to repeat the excellent comments of my colleagues here today. We are, after all, here for the same purpose: to devise ways of ensuring water security as one of the key elements in conflict prevention and social improvement. First, let me say that when we created the Water Initiative for Africa, there was already a lot of work being done to ensure greater accessibility to potable water in Africa and in the developing world. But we are now at the stage where access to water is in some respects the easiest and most obvious part of the equation. Nonetheless, we see in Africa that 80% of disease is waterborne. So we can get the water, but we are still beset by the diseases it carries. We also see that food production in Africa is hampered by the consistently predatory encroachment of aridification. The trees and vegetations are disappearing. Why? Because every African mother knows that it is vital, existentially vital, to boil all drinking and cooking water in order to prevent disease. So they reluctantly burn everything available all day to boil water. The result is, to some imperfect extent, disease prevention today, soil erosion, and crop failure tomorrow. Let me also preface my remarks by saying that water purity is the critical baseline, the foundation of a stable society. Without healthy water and healthy food, it is impossible to ensure that other infrastructure and development can take root. In other words, absent a basic level of health as a foundation, it is impossible to build the modern visible infrastructure which helps generate prosperity. What use are iPads if the brain has been malnourished, that the information of today's world cannot be absorbed into a better life for tomorrow? Our objective then was to address the issue holistically. Our view then at the Water Initiative was that we had to provide a basic level of water purity which was not dependent on modern infrastructure and was durable and productive on a large scale over decades without spare parts or support costs or even expertise. First, we needed to ensure that absolutely safe water could be delivered day in and day out, eradicating all biological and chemical threats and addressing the many specific waterborne threats from totally dissolved solids, such as lead, arsenics, which are prevalent. Second, we needed to ensure we could eliminate the need to boil water before consumption so that we could immediately stop the need to cut down trees, with all the attendant damage and cost and wasted labor involved. Third, we needed to ensure that we could divert purified water to create new, efficient drip feed irrigation, which is 500 times more efficient than open ditch irrigation and hydroponic agriculture. Thus, village-level, healthy and sustainable agriculture can resume. We are also aware that in many areas of Africa, Asia, the Americas, and Europe, land has become so polluted by bad water that agriculture has ceased to be viable. We needed to be sure we could help to resuscitate water tables and agricultural water. Fourth, we need to be able to inject this capability into areas that there is no technical support, no electricity, and even no existing infrastructure. And we need to do it at very low cost with minimal negative impact on existing cultures. That was our challenge, and we worked very hard and very closely with my colleagues at the International Strategic Studies Association and the Argonaut Technologies, and the result was a staggeringly new technology, a truly game-changing capability. We have created a water purification capability which can be totally solar and or battery powered, which purifies water to 0.01 microns. That is 5 times better than the US Army standard. Requires no filter changes, requires no ongoing serious maintenance or technical skills, and which is dramatically smaller and cheaper than anything available in the world today. If I may hold the unit here, which is very light, this is what it looks like. We look at civil unrest in some areas of Africa, which has not been solely caused by widespread unemployment. Rather, the unemployment has been the result of societal dysfunction. It would give me great pleasure to talk to anyone here today to discuss this further, and I thank you for your time and attention.
First, yes. I want to start by thanking my colleagues on the panel for your excellent introductory remarks and for forgiving me for rushing you and actually holding you to as close as I could civilly, since I am a civil environmental engineer, to a 5-minute plus standard. I'm going to make two comments of my own, and then we'll get into hopefully some questions and answers before we run out of time. One comment as a citizen, since I'm a citizen soldier, and one comment as a soldier. So as a citizen and a former academic or recovering academic, we used to like to basically comfort the afflict and inflict the comfortable. So this first one, let's see where it lands with you personally. I think social entrepreneurship, as I said earlier, is going to be a solution that we need to pay more attention to. Don't give me a fish, teach me to fish. And this involves startup companies. And we've got to look at how do we allow people to invest in themselves and their own communities via private sector as opposed to a handout. You can start with grants and then transition to loans, but I was able to do this very successfully with a lot of help of others in Sadr City and Baghdad, and I would argue that's just as probably as worse of an environment as anywhere you'd have in the continent of Africa. And then that's what I alluded to earlier when I worked on the Institute for Engineering and Humanities. So I would argue let's look at a social entrepreneurship focus that puts the private sector in the lead, but again, you're getting people to invest in themselves and their own organizations as they help solve problems. The second point I would make from an Army Reserve and as a soldier is in the United States, why can't the Army, in this case the Army Reserve, why can't I go to Africa and do Title X training and let's say do construction and build a facility where I train my own forces while providing medical training, while providing logistics training. And we leave, you now have a facility that is for a startup company that was funded by a loan or a grant from a joint U.S.-African private sector approach. Why can't you do that? For the lawyers in the room, it's absolutely legal because I'm doing Title X training. Everybody wins. And it brings the Department of Defense and the State Department and the nations together, and it puts people in charge of their future, which goes back to that social entrepreneurship. And I get great Title X training out of it for my formations as we are prepared to go globally and do what we need to do. So with that, what I'd like to do is open up the floor to questions or comments. What I would ask is if you have a question, raise your hand. Please try to be very succinct and short, and then I will allow anybody on the panel to answer as they see fit. Who would like to be the first? I think I saw a hand over here. Sir?
Thank you so much. My name is Dr. John Figaro. I'm from Haiti. And I'm really delighted to be here today. I live in Boston, and I came to hear all those great experts talking about the security of water. But right now, we have a huge problem in Haiti, which is caused by the UN, who brought the troop in Haiti. Now we have cholera. And we have the largest ongoing epidemic in the world, already killed more than 8,000 people, more than almost 700,000 have been affected by the bacteria. And unfortunately, almost 2 years after, since the first case, and October 14, 2010, 10 months after the earthquake, the UN still has not taken any responsibility to help Haiti building a national system water. And despite all the studies, and the last one is from Yale University, saying that UN is responsible before the international law and also violating his own law and Asian law, but we still don't have any answer from the UN. And my question, and if you can share that with us, our problem is this epidemic killing people, and this water used to serve thousands of more than 8 million people living with less than $2 a day. They cannot buy water. And it's a very sad situation for those people. And despite of the UN who has to take care of what they did in Haiti, what can we do to resolve this crisis that we have in Haiti, killing kids and many people? Thank you so much.
Which panel member would like to be first answering this serious question? Don't all raise your hand at once, please.
Well, I don't know the answer to your bigger question, but there is a huge program of sanitation in Haiti that is happening now, and I know our organization is part of it. So part of it is, I mean, it's not the same as your original question, I recognize, but there is also a need to build infrastructure domestically.
So that's a vast question that you've asked. The U.S. government's been involved in many aspects of development and reconstruction in Haiti, including work on cholera, which is an exceptionally difficult problem. There have also been, I think, on the bright side, some innovative approaches to economic development that look at many sectors and try to link them together. And I hesitate to even give one example because it just touches on an enormous problem. But one of the things that we've been encouraged about is to try to protect the watersheds because they are the ultimate source of water other than rainfall that can be captured in the short term from Haiti, but to do it in such a way that we integrate the protection of watersheds in Haiti with agricultural production, and to do that in such a way that we apply some fundamental but advanced technologies to increase productivity of food production. So there's a program that AID's been supporting called the Haiti Winner Project, WINNER, which does just that. It protects watersheds, supports reforestation, at the same time introduces new and more effective ways to utilize water to increase food production through vertical farming techniques, and at the same time facilitates the passage of water through the strengthening of canals, both building them and cleaning them out. Using water is pretty important in agriculture, and we in Coca-Cola have had a project called the Haiti Hope Project, which has been targeted on in reducing improvements in mango production and related water efficiency to increase the productivity of mango trees themselves, employment, and the export of product. And then there is a range of activities in the whole area of water, sanitation and hygiene, which are targeted, of course, at trying to be able to come up with better sanitation, hygiene, and clean water. All of this has to be done on an integrated basis. We don't do this on our own. We do it closely with the World Bank. We do it closely with Coca-Cola. We do it closely with the Department of Defense and the U.S. Army, particularly at the onset of the relief effort. If I had a long time, we could get into a lot more detail, but I just wanted to convey to you that that a multi-sectoral approach seems to be the most effective way to go there.
If it's okay with the panel, I'll go ahead and move on to the next question. I know, just because I want to try to get as many as we can. Yes, ma'am, right there.
Hi, my name is Payang Difang. I'm a recent graduate with an LLM in global health law, and I'm actually reading the reports on Haiti and cholera. And I wanted to clarify a little bit maybe the question of that gentleman, which is basically that cholera used to not exist at all in Haiti until, I guess, you know, the UN and whoever came, I mean, yes, the UN troops came and I guess brought cholera into Haiti. And I guess the question that people who are now suing the UN have been asking is, so now cholera is going to be endemic in the country, which means that people will have cholera for, you know, future generations. And what is the responsibility of the world community, the UN, to ensure that it's going to be taken care of? and maybe there could be some compensation. And I guess it's a good question as to, I guess it relates to water because the contamination came from water and it's going to be taken care of. But I guess they were also thinking about the whole health system infrastructure for the long-term care of cholera in the future. And that's certainly a question that maybe water security and how it relates to global health security, especially in the context of having humanitarian intervention that, sometimes you have accidents happen. Okay.
Thank you for the question. I guess I'd like to ask the panel members that didn't answer last time to give you a first opportunity to answer before we open it up to the entire panel. Panel members? Entire panel members?
I think we can't answer the question about responsibility. It's not any of our roles. I think the point you make about health security being part of the water security agenda is a valid one, and probably one that the water people haven't sufficiently looked at. Thank you.
I know that's not a very good answer to your question because it was such a hard question, but hopefully we can have some follow-on discussions. Okay, Chris wants to weigh in. Go ahead, Chris.
I do want to acknowledge, in case anybody is here from the Pan American Health Organization, that they've been doing kind of yeoman's work in Haiti on cholera. So if they wanted to afterwards talk to you, that would be terrific. So this intersection between health and security in Africa's future generation is pretty critical. And we have at USAID, as well as a number of donors, as well as many of the NGOs around the table. I see representatives from WaterAid and Catholic Relief Services and Millennium Water Alliance here today, as well as World Vision, have huge investments in water sanitation, supply and hygiene, the WASH programs. And they are really critical for security. And here's my perspective on it, is that we're looking at the next generation in Africa, so therefore, as well as the present generation. So therefore, the question is, what is the health of small children? And what are the threats to small children? And one of those, which is subtle but pernicious, is stunting. And stunting arising from the lack of nutrients caused by up to 6 severe cases of diarrhea in the first 2 years of a child's life. And there are now 400 million people on the planet that are cognitively or physically stunted or both, and many of them are on the African continent. So by making an investment in protecting small children through water supply, sanitation, and hygiene programs, linking those programs with nutrition programs so as to keep nutrients down in the first 2 critical years of life, you make an investment also not only in the well-being of the individual, but in the future generation. And you make it an investment in terms of millions of people over time. And I think that's an important way to look at security and look at water and look at health. It's also a gigantic investment. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being utilized in this space.
Thanks, Chris. Any other panel members want to comment? Okay, next question. Sir, I'll get to you next. I'm going to go all the way over here to the far left. Yes, ma'am. Yes, you're the one. Congratulations.
Hi. Hello, my name is Megan Roulard with 21st Century Science and Technology. I've been working on a project referenced earlier, the NAWAPA project for North America, and also I've been looking at the Trans-Aqua project for Africa. I consider myself a student of history, and I'd recommend to everybody here to read the book by Elliot Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt's son, As He Saw It, where he lays out that Roosevelt had a very clear post-war vision for the world and for Africa, and had arguments with Winston Churchill and said, I want to see an end to the 19th century methods of colonialism. And it was amazing what Roosevelt, what could have happened if he hadn't died. I mean, people who worked on the TVA traveled around the world to try to get similar projects built. I think, Roosevelt envisioned the filling of the Qatar Depression. I see this outlook in stark contrast to the message that President Obama delivered when he went to South Africa. I don't know if people are familiar with the quote, but in his presentation this summer, he said to an audience in South Africa, ultimately, if you think about all the youth that everybody have mentioned here in Africa, if everybody is raising living standards to the point where everybody's got a car, everybody's got air conditioning, everybody's got a big house, well, the planet will boil over. That was his message. And, you know, keeping in mind this message from Elliot Roosevelt, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with what looks like dictating a lower standard of living to Africans in the name of climate change. And I think this really starts to look like the 19th century methods that Roosevelt referred to. And I can't help but wonder if this has to do with why projects like TransAqua, why there are so many projects that remain unbuilt in Africa. So I'd appreciate any feedback on that.
Panel members, any of you wish to comment?
I do.
I'll refer very quickly back to the Presidential Policy Directive, which is really focused about development in Africa. And the key sort of dynamic there is that what's good for Africa economically is also good for U.S. businesses in the long run. And the President's message during his trip was very heavily focused on U.S. businesses engaging and investing in Africa and building those opportunities for development. So I don't know the specific quote you're talking about. Honestly, I didn't read his speech, but I need to go back and look at it again. But certainly what I've gotten in the policy discussions and everything I've done for 3 years within our policy lanes has been focused on helping move Africa forward on the development side and economically, and again recognizing that there's some benefit to the United States from doing that.
Do you want to comment, Chris?
I do. We could talk a lot about history, but let me just talk about recent history. So I firmly do not agree with you. I firmly believe that President Obama is not dictating a lower standard for people in Africa. I firmly believe that President Obama is trying to achieve a higher standard for people in Africa. And he's doing it along with many other countries and public and private stakeholders in a multi-pronged approach. Now, maybe it's not as well known as it could be, and that's always a problem in this day and age. But I know at AID, we have a dedicated effort on the one hand to trying to enhance education at the primary school level, which is pretty critical. At the same time, during his trip to Africa, he launched an initiative called Power Africa, which dealt with helping to build out the energy infrastructure, both small grid and large grid. And without energy, it's very, very difficult to be able to develop. He previously announced the new Food Security Alliance, which is targeted on bringing in partners into Africa so as to help things like social entrepreneurship that you have been talking about, General Talley. And I could go on. I've served as a public servant for a long, long time under many presidents, both as an appointee and as a career Foreign Service officer, as well as SES. And I think I can put different presidents in perspective. And I truly believe that this president is right on the tip of the spear of trying to do something extremely important and effective in Africa. Thank you.
What I'd like to add is basically in Africa we have our biggest asset is also our curse. I mean, the fact that we have so much resources, untapped resources, we've become another ground for superpower jockeying, and the Chinese are obviously there. It's very unfortunate, though, that the basics, which are health above anything else, is not in place. And then I think if one was to provide education in gradual step, then you would empower people. We have now huge Chinese factories in the industrial zone that are polluting the population. In many terms, they do provide employment, they do provide economic growth, but there's a contradiction because, of course, there'll be long-term effects from environmental degradation. So how to balance all this is a challenge ahead.
Just a very, very small comment to tag on to what my U.S. government colleagues have been saying. You know, as the combatant command, Africa Command doesn't have a voice in the policy discussion, but we do watch it very closely. And I think that what we're actually seeing in terms of U.S.-Africa policy, or what we've seen over the past few years, is really an evolution toward what I would call a mainstreaming of U.S.-Africa policy. So we've seen a shift away from sort of a, you know, let's respond to crises, less of an exclusive focus on humanitarian and sort of disaster response kinds of things, and more of a mainstreaming of that relationship toward trying to develop partnerships, equal partnerships with countries and regional organizations across the region. That's going to be a long-term effort, but I think that's where I sit, with my limited perspective, that's what I've been seeing.
I want to thank you for the question. On a personal note, as he saw it, I wrote it down. I'm going to go get it, and I'm going to read the whole thing. Okay, so thank you. Sir, I think in the middle there, you had a question, sir?
Hi, Larry Sperling with State Department's Global Partnership Initiative, and this question is primarily for Jeff. Others who have perspective would welcome your thoughts as well. But Coca-Cola's leadership on on water issues is truly visionary and to be greatly commended. So I'm wondering, what's your best advice for encouraging and inspiring other companies to begin to view contributing to these efforts as part of their triple bottom line and joining forces with Coke?
Yeah, great. Well, let me take a first stab at it, and then maybe Chris can add in as well from a USAID perspective. I mean, what I've seen over the last 5 or so years is a growing awareness on the part of businesses on the importance of water. You've seen a sort of a rising tide, I think was the metaphor used earlier. And more companies are beginning to realize that the issues of water access, water quality, water availability are critical issues for their business and the communities in which they operate. And so I think you're seeing more and more engagement through the U.S. Water Partnership, and we heard from CH2M Hill, and there are many other private sector companies involved in the U.S. Water Partnership, and lots of other venues. The CEO Water Mandate, there were a ton of businesses at Stockholm last week, and you're seeing just an increasing level of awareness, I think, and engagement. I think in terms of taking it to the next level in terms of partnership, I think one of the benefits that we had at Coca-Cola is that I worked at USAID for nearly 8 years, and I had lots of contacts and friends. It made it very easy for me to kind of intermediate between Coca-Cola and USAID, although we did have the benefit of Tom Harvey and Monica Ellis from GETF and Lee Swanson and others. So I guess one advice would be is to understand the challenges of forming a public-private partnership and make sure that you have the right partners that can help be that switching gear, because the cultures can be quite different in terms of expectations, timelines, et cetera. And if you have some intermediation, somebody that can help kind of be a go-between, I think that's helpful to get started. Once it gets started, I think, from our perspective at AID, Chris and I were just chatting at lunch, it's kind of hard to keep track of all the different ways in which Coke and USAID are now partnering, because it's taken off kind of at the local level in many ways within the business. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Chris.
So I have 3 points to make. One is the practical quality of a partnership. Having a partner that's on the ground and really understands what's happening on the ground is pretty critical. Coke is the largest employer in Africa with 200,000 employees. And to give you a wonderful example of being practical, one of our partnerships is in Mozambique, and we are operating in an area that really needed a significantly improved water supply. And we found an abandoned but operable water treatment facility in a former Dutch textile operation. And so we did the simple act, which was work together to rehab the textile rehab the water treatment facility. And that in turn ended up to become a pretty critical source of water for a wide variety of uses. And that's simple, practical, requires knowledge of what's going on the ground. I think the second point is transparency again. It's very important for a company when they come into an area to really have a fix on what is the water situation there, you know, in terms of their responsibility as the steward of the environment and also access to water and also the potential impact of their access on competing water demands. So Coca-Cola has a worldwide database, and they in turn have turned that database over to the World Resources Institute, WRI. And now we in turn are working with WRI to take a hard look at that database coupled with other databases that they have and how that might relate to water-based decisions that we're going to be making in our development programs. So that's exceptionally important. Finally, you know, in terms of engaging entrepreneurs to move into the developing world, that's a huge challenge. And in Sweden last week, we and the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA, launched a $25 million partnership that's aimed at doing just that, but in a very different way. And what we're doing is we are focusing on how do you basically secure water for food and to basically come up ways in which to reduce water use but still increase food production. And we identified 3 barriers that really have to be overcome. One is water use and storage. 2 is the desalinization of the high salinity levels in areas like coastal aquifers. And the last is water reuse and efficiency. And these are tough problems to deal with. So we put out a call, and a week ago, we came out with what's known as a request for information that says this is what we're about, this is what we're thinking about doing, and we're going to go out with a call for proposals on November 4th. And essentially what we're saying is, you know, we have a huge problem in these 3 category areas. You tell us how you would solve those problems by taking a technology or a process that's already been proven in a developed or developing country, and then taking that activity and moving it into a developing country. And we will in turn, in the initial phase, share the cost with you on a startup, on an initial basis, on a $25 million call, where the awards will be somewhere between $300,000 and $3 million. Now, that's really significant because what we're saying is, you tell us what you think the solution is, as opposed to the normal government RFP that says, we got a great idea, we got a solution, connect the dots. So we're very optimistic about that approach. Thank you.
I'm sorry we've run out of time for further questions. I apologize for that because I think we could continue to do this for a long time and learn a lot. What I'd like to do is first, let's have a round of applause and thank our entire panel and also you. And before I turn it over to Jeff for his closing remarks for the summit, I just want to make 2 points. One is, for me, what today has reaffirmed is what I have always believed, both when I was an academic and the private sector. It is the strong linkage between water and the environment, economics, security, agriculture, things that we all take for granted that I'm somewhat surprised that the rest of the world is slowly acting as if it's new, and it's not. And then secondly, that the military can help us as we train our forces globally to provide positive metrics to the population as we in the armed forces support our combatant commands and bring the State Department together as we do things that are right for the world, not just for the United States. And so anyway, I'd like to now reintroduce again Jeff Seabright, Vice President of Environment and Water Resources for the Coca-Cola Company, to make his final remarks. Jeff?
Great. Well, thank you very much, General Talley, and it just remains to me to close this out for the day, for the afternoon. First, I want to just thank all of our speakers and panelists. It's been an extraordinarily rich discussion here today, and thank all of you for your attention to this really critical topic. We've had over 200 people from diplomatic, military, government, business, civil society, academia, coming together here today to focus on water security. And I'm not going to try to summarize everything that was said here. It was too rich to possibly do that. But maybe just touch on a handful of themes very quickly and then close us out. One, I think we've seen and experienced in the discussions today that this is a complex set of issues. It's not just a complex nexus of sort of water as it relates to food and energy and climate change and economic growth, but it's also an important nexus around defense, development, and diplomacy, and how these security issues interact, both at the macro level, transboundary water issues that can lead to potential conflict or cooperation, and sort of the micro level issues of human health and economic empowerment and safe water access, the lack of which can lead to chronic instability and security risks. So the complexity and the challenge not to be underestimated. Secondly, that the glass is half full, I think, is probably the way I would say it, that there's certainly a risk, there's a security underside to this, but there's also an opportunity for building cooperation. We heard from General Bostic, I think the quote from Ben Franklin about not knowing the value of water until the well is dry. There was another great American, Mark Twain, who wrote that whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. And I think our challenge is to prove him wrong, and I think we can. And related to that is sort of how we're going to do that, which I think we've heard a lot about public-private partnership, and I think the comments that General Talley to my right here has made around using the best of us approach, which is very much sort of informing us in the U.S. Water Partnership, to bring together diverse partners to really leverage each other's collective assets to address these challenges. And I think the social entrepreneurship model is a very, very, very powerful one in that space, and something that, had we more time, we could go into. Fourthly, government and institutional efforts are obviously key. Joint governance around shared water issues, transboundary issues, looking at the opportunities to build collaborative platforms and cooperative platforms and mitigate political risk, not exacerbate it, is I think, is critical. And then just lastly, I just say optimism. I mean, we can solve these issues. This is not rocket science. This is something that we can solve. We know how to do this. We just have to get focused and organized and generate the collective will of all of us in this room and elsewhere to get on with it. And to be constructively discontent, in the words of my CEO and boss, Muhtar Kent. That is that we know we can solve it, but we've got to have a sense of urgency. So again, I just want to thank our sponsors here today, the U.S. Institute for Peace, the Association of the U.S. Army, and the U.S. Water Partnership. This is the beginning of a year-long initiative to drive real solutions and partnership in this space. And for those of you who are contributing to that with respect to the Nigeria Trust Fund work, are going to go to room B241 at the conclusion of today's event to begin your work on that important work stream. So please join me in thanking our host for a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I have an administrative announcement. I need to remind the trust members that head upstairs for your 2 to 5 meeting. Okay, 2 to 5 for the trust members, and all of you, safe travels, and thank you.